Let's talk about Sandra Barkey's Foucault, Femininity, and the Modernization of Patriarchal Power. So, this article is actually a chapter in her book right here. Sandra Barkey is the author of this article, but she is drawing on and using Foucault's theory in this text. So, it can be a little bit confusing who came up with which ideas, which is why we're going to go through it slowly and carefully. So in this video, I'm going to mostly focus in on the Foucauldian ideas of disciplinary power and docile bodies. And then in the next video, I'll talk much more about Sandra Barkey's actual theory and how she views this as one of the ways that femininity is constructed and maintained. Okay, so starting off with this Foucauldian idea of disciplinary power. I know that sounds like a really technical term, but once we start diving into it, this is an idea that we see all around us in daily life. It's something we're really, really, really familiar with. So let's start at the beginning. First of all, when people think of systems of power, we're really used to thinking of something like maybe authoritarian power, where there is one person who has a whole bunch of power and they are forcing somebody else or maybe a group of people to do something. So one person standing over somebody else with a big stick, making them do something. If the person doesn't do it, they'll be like punished or some sort of consequence. This is how we're used to thinking about power. And it's one of the ways that power exists and is enacted in the world, but it's not the only way, right? So Foucault is really interested in, the much more everyday little ways that power is enacted and maintained in our social world. So let's go back to that traditional model of how power works. If we were to apply that model to an example, we might think of it as maybe a parent requiring their child to clean the room. So the parent sort of stands over their child and says, clean the room. If you don't clean your room, you'll be grounded, or I'll take away the Wi-Fi password. And they stand there and watch the kid clean their room until the room is clean. Okay, so the child is cleaning their room because they are being watched and observed. Someone will know if they don't clean that room, and they'll get in trouble if they don't do it. So that's the traditional way that power works. But if we think of any kid who's ever been told to clean their room, that's not usually how the scenario goes, right? So usually it's something like parent says, clean your room, and then they go away for a while. And the kid, hopefully, starts cleaning their room because they know at some point their parent will come back and check in on how it went. They know at some point someone might come to look and see whether or not they followed the rules, whether or not they did the thing that they were told. And they start to follow the rules even when no one is standing there forcing them to, because they know that someone will check. Okay. After a while, the kid might start to get in the habit of just cleaning their room on their own, right? Because they know at some point they'll be told to do it. And so they're like, okay, that'll be a huge pain. So I'll just, put my clothes in the hamper as we go. And then they start putting their clothes in the hamper because that's just the thing that you do. It just becomes part of the everyday routine. It's not that someone is standing there forcing them to put their clothes in the hamper every single time. They just start to do it because they've been taught to do it. This is the idea of disciplinary power, where instead of somebody else forcing us to conform to a system of power, we start to make ourselves conform. We start to internalize all of these messages, and we start to enforce them on ourselves. Sometimes we do that because we're aware that somebody notices that I'm not following along, it'll be awkward or weird, and I might get in trouble. But often we just follow along because it's what we've been taught to do, because it starts to feel like the normal or the natural or just the thing that one does. And so we start to monitor and control our own actions and behaviors in all kinds of little ways in our daily lives. We start to monitor and control our own actions and behaviors, even down to this minute level about what we do with our bodies, how we move our bodies, where we place our bodies, when we put our bodies in those different places, how we shape and adorn our bodies. This is what the idea of what Foucault calls a docile body. Okay, when people hear that term, they often think something about like docility and femininity. This is not what that term has anything to do with. It is not talking about femininity yet. We are not there. Next video. Right now, when talking about docile bodies, all that means is that it is a body that, again, is moved in accordance with certain kinds of norms and expectations, is placed in certain physical locations in accordance with certain norms and expectations, and is shaped and adorned and decorated in accordance with those norms and expectations. Okay, let's go through another example. So when Foucault was thinking about disciplinary power, he often thinks about institutions. So military, prisons, hospitals, and schools are some of his very famous examples. Let's think about schools, because that's one that we all are familiar with. So let's see, there's some obvious ways that we all start to experience disciplinary power at schools. And there's some obvious ways where we start to shape our own actions and behaviors within schools. Let's see here, if you went to a high school that had a bell system, you might be used to moving your body to different parts of the building when you hear different bells. So the bell rings, you pack up your bag, you leave one class. I think there's a warning bell telling you to get to the next class. And by the time that next bell rings, you need to be sitting there ready to go. This is all about the ways in which we start to move our body around physical spaces in accordance with certain kinds of norms and expectations. Now, when we're thinking about the bell system, you might be especially aware there, like, if I'm late to class, I'll get in trouble. So you're following along with the rules, but you're especially doing it because, you might get caught pretty easily and you might get in trouble if you don't follow along. There are a lot of ways in which we start to conform and go along with these systems of power in ways that are much, much, much harder to notice because they start to seem, again, so mundane and everyday. So let's keep thinking about schools for a sec. If you go into any university classroom and look around as students are walking in the door to start class, you'll probably see people come in the door, find a desk, and sit down. And you'll see people do this over and over. There's not usually somebody telling them, okay, as you go through the door, find a desk and sit down. It's what people come in and do. You're unlikely to find students sitting on the floor. You are unlikely to see anyone standing on the desk. You are unlikely to see anyone just, circling the room over and over and over. These are all things that we could do. There's nothing preventing us from doing any of those things. It's just really unlikely that people are going to do them because we're so used to walking in the door, finding a desk, and sitting down. Now, we don't have to sit in desks. Sometimes desks are deeply uncomfortable. They're designed for certain kinds of bodies, certain size bodies. They are not designed to be physically comfortable for everyone. Sometimes it will be the case that sitting on the floor or standing, maybe even standing on the desk would be more physically comfortable. But people tend not to do it because starting when you're very, very, very young, we get taught that what it is to be a student is to come through the door, find a desk, and sit down. Right? So we get taught over and over and over, not just that this is the thing to do, but that this is part of what it is to be in the position, to be in the role of being a student. So that you find that desk and you sit down. Tend not to stand on the desk. Tends not to even show up as a possibility because we're so used to doing it in this one certain way. Right? So this is how disciplinary power works. It's no longer one person or one group who has all the power and who then is clearly and straightforwardly forcing other people to go along with it. Rather, we all start to monitor and police our own behavior so that we are the ones getting ourselves to conform. And when we do this over and over and over again, it starts to seem natural. It starts to seem just, again, normal. It's a way of obscuring how power works, how power functions. It makes it harder to notice that these are choices that we are making, or these are ways that we are choosing to organize our social world. And we don't have to do it this way. Now, I do want to be clear. Sometimes disciplinary systems and disciplinary power results in fantastic outcomes. Maybe there are good reasons to have all the students sitting at desks during class. Sometimes they result in really harmful, toxic, terrible outcomes. Having everyone sort of monitoring and policing their own behavior in accordance with social norms doesn't seem necessarily that great. Let's think about the role of social media in our lives, for example, and how we start to change and shape our own behaviors, sort of to fit in with what we see on social media. Sometimes disciplinary systems and disciplinary power, is enacted in ways that yield kind of neutral outcomes. Maybe it's neither good nor bad. It's just a thing that people start to do, right? So it's not about the mere fact that these systems of power give us bad outcomes, because again, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's neutral. It's that it's a system of power that is giving us these outcomes. This is what is really, really important here, is that this is one of the ways that power works. And it's one of the ways that power works that is especially invisible and hard to notice. So that once we do start looking at it, we can see it everywhere in our daily lives in ways that are difficult to identify at first. Right, so this is how Foucauldian notions of disciplinary power and docile bodies play out. And these are the ideas that Sandra Bartke is then going to pick up and use in her work.